Hi, my name is Nick Maggetti, and today I will be speaking about gun violence in the USA. There's an ever-increasing number of gun violence crimes in America today. As we see the numbers rise, I can't help but worry about what the future holds for us. I remember being in middle school, prepared for an active shooter in the classroom, hiding in the corner with the lights off while a teacher went around firing fake shots. How can we come to this as a nation? We're the only country in the world that practices active shooting drills, and the reason we do is simply because we have to. There are too many instances of planned firearm attacks in the US to write off, and something needs to be done. There are many places to begin, starting with the ban of all assault rifles such as AR-15s and increased counseling for our education system. We can hopefully slow down these tragedies from happening at such a large rate. This year is likely to be the second highest year for mass shootings in the United States on record, according to data compiled by the Gun Violence Archive, which is a nonprofit that tracks gun violence incidents throughout the country. There have been at least 607 mass shootings since November 22nd this year, and that is a close second to the total of 690 mass shootings last year in 2021. The United States is likely to soon surpass the total of 610 mass shootings in 2020, with a little less than a month left of 2022 to go. So far this year, at least 3,179 people have been shot in mass shootings, resulting in 637 deaths and more than 2,500 people injured. Gun violence is preventable, and there is plenty we can do to slow this down. I understand that this issue is very politicized and divided. On one hand, there are people who do not own guns and believe that it is not necessary to own one to prevent any accidents. Then there are the people who highly value their freedom to own a firearm for either defense or to fight back against the government in a militia, as the Second Amendment says. But what is often not taken into account is that the Second Amendment was written 200 years ago when there was not as much diversity and power in the firearm options. Also, statistically speaking, having a gun in the home increases the likelihood of an accident, murder, or suicide. My proposition is the public health approach. I'd like to see this in place to help aid with gun violence. The Center for Disease Control, Prevention, and the World Health Organization outline a public health approach to violence prevention based on 4 steps. First is to define and monitor this problem. Second, identify risk and protective factors. Third, develop and test prevention strategies. And 4, ensure widespread adoption of effective strategies. The first step focuses on researchers and policymakers needing reliable data to understand the scope and complexity of gun violence. There are many different types of gun violence, and each type often requires different prevention strategies. Collecting and distributing reliable firearm data is essential to combating gun violence through a public health approach. The second step focuses on prevention and addresses risk factors that lead to gun violence and protective factors that can reduce gun violence. A thorough body of research needs to identify specific risk factors, both at the individual level and at the community and societal level, which increase the likelihood of engaging in gun violence. At an individual level, having access to guns is a risk factor for violence, increasing the likelihood that a dangerous situation will become fatal. Simply having a gun in one's home doubles the chance of dying by homicide and increases the likelihood of suicide death by over 3-fold. Other individual risk factors closely linked to gun violence include a history of violent behavior, exposure to violence, as well as drug and alcohol abuse, Community level factors also increase the likelihood of gun violence. Underprivileged neighborhoods with high concentrations of poverty and lack of economic opportunity are more likely to experience high rates of violence. Policies and programs should ease risk factors and promote protective factors at the individual and community levels. Next, step 3 focuses on developing and testing prevention strategies. The foundation for an effective gun violence prevention policy is a universal background check law, ensuring that each person who seeks to purchase or transfer a firearm undergoes a background check prior to purchase. Universal background checks should be supplemented by a firearm licensing system, which regulates and tracks the flow of firearms to ensure that firearms do not make it into the hands of at-risk individuals. Building upon this, policymakers can create interventions that target behavioral risk factors for gun violence, and they can push for policies that address community risk factors. In addition to these prevention policies, there are a number of strategies that can reduce gun violence within communities. For example, community-based violence intervention programs work to de-escalate conflicts, interrupt cycles of repeated abuse, and support those at higher risk for violence. The final step of the public health approach is ensuring the public response to these implemented strategies and are not only effective, but also promote justice. Historically disenfranchised groups need to be involved in the process to ensure that public health strategies do not have unintended consequences. For example, gun violence prevention policies should be consistently evaluated to ensure that they do not stigmatize individuals living with mental illness or perpetuate the discriminatory and racist practices embedded in our criminal justice system. Nowadays, it is so easy to become politicized and fed propaganda through the media, but I feel like we all have a common ground here. None of us want this to keep happening, and if we just set the politics aside for a moment and focus on the livelihood of our fellow Americans, we could really get somewhere. I'm not saying that we get rid of all guns, although I feel like we do not need them, but we should not be allowing lax background check laws, assault weapons, and high-capacity magazines to become a normality in the America of tomorrow. Our future generations deserve to grow up in a peaceful America, free of the horrors of gun violence. Thank you for listening.